Science, as I've kind of emphasized already, is very important for a person of faith. Very important. We need to understand science in order to correctly interpret the world that we live in. And we must be able to interpret scientific findings ourselves from the biblical worldview. We need to have a good grasp on science just to be able to understand the world that we live in. But another reason why science is very important for a person of faith is because it's through science that we are exploring God's creation. And what science has revealed to us is a marvelous, marvelous thing. What God has created is just spectacular. As science continues to progress, we know more and more and more about God, about His creation than anyone ever knew before. As microscopes continue to advance, as telescopes continue to advance, science has revealed an aspect of God's creation that no one ever saw before. So as science progresses and we learn more about this world that we live in, the more we can develop a better appreciation of who God is and what it is that He has made for us. And animals fall into that category. Animals are an amazing proof of God's creation, amazing proof that our world is the product of an intelligent mind, that there is intelligence, a sophistication behind the world that we live in, and animals serve this purpose. Me, I've always been a big animal lover. I've always loved animals. Most people do. I mean, it is rare that you will find someone that doesn't like animals. They exist, but they are the rare few, I tell you. They're such a blessing to us. Within the creation itself, there's probably little that we love more than the animals. And we just love them. There is something just truly remarkable about them. The beauty, the elegance, they're just fascinating. They're fascinating just to watch the way they move, the beauty of it all, the colors. Animals are just fascinating. The picture that I showed you before were my dogs, no longer with me. But I moved here to the Northwest with 4 dogs. Got myself up to 5 at one point. I've had dogs and cats. Right now I have a freshwater tank in my classroom, a saltwater tank. I have both turtles, a tortoise, and a snake, all in my classroom. Animals are just a very important thing. We just love our animals. And there are new discoveries happening all the time. Even last month, a new discovery of a shark was made. This shark right here was just reported to be discovered last month, called the ninja lantern shark. Called the ninja shark because it is pitch black, found living deep in the ocean on the continental slope. And it's got bioluminescent structures on its head, so its head glows. And they think this glowing head may help it blend into the dark waters around it. New discovery of a lantern shark. But animals are fascinating. Today it's estimated that there are somewhere between 3 and 30 million species of animals on Earth. It's kind of sad that we have eliminated so much habitat, that we live in these concrete jungles where we have little exposure to God's creation. I often wonder why it is that we moved indoors for worship when the most apt place would seem to be out in God's creation, worshiping Him. I don't know about you, but when I go out hiking, I'm just inevitably drawn into a state of worship, out just enjoying God's creation. But I find it disappointing when I'm out hiking and I don't come across any animals. I remember the last time I took a hike up to Heather Lake, beautiful, pristine lake, being fed by waterfalls up in the, glacier-fed waterfalls, beautiful, pristine lake. I'm here enjoying this beautiful lake, and next thing I know, a little chipmunk comes and jumps up on the rock beside me. And next thing I know, all of my attention is captivated by this little chipmunk at a location of spectacular natural beauty. But it's estimated that there's somewhere between 3 and 30 million animals on Earth today. That's an incredible range of estimates. And that's because the number of insects is estimated to be somewhere between 1 and 30 million. In reality, we just don't know how many animals there are on the Earth. But most of them exist in rainforest, coral reefs. This is where you have high density of animals today. An interesting side note, you may not have thought about this, animals are the only aspect of God's creation that He actually spent 2 days on. If you examine the days of creation, day 1, God created the heavens and the earth, light and dark. Day 2, separated the waters below from the waters above. Day 3, dry land and plants. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. God spent one day making all of the astronomical bodies. Day 5, sea creatures and flying creatures. Day 6, land animals and man. Only aspect of God's creation that he spent more than one day on was the animals. So it's no wonder that we see such variety, such incredible beauty, and that they're so fascinating to us. A lot of what God made was invested there within making the animals. Now, one aspect of animals that is often overlooked is incredible intelligence of animals. Animals are crazy intelligent. You know, we don't tend to think of them as such, but you really have to observe them closely to really realize the intelligence that they have. Recently, I had a mouse at my house causing trouble. And I eventually decided to put up a camera to try to catch this mouse in action. And it was incredible what I found this mouse doing. You wouldn't believe how intelligent this mouse was. It was like Mission Impossible kind of thing, coming down and taking my cheese and stuff. Seriously, though. Animals are very, very intelligent. Even the animals that we consider the most simple, like your insects. I mean, insects really don't even have a brain. They just have a ganglia, a cluster of nerves that serves as a region of neuron processing, but they don't even really have a brain as far as we can think of it. But your insects are terribly, terribly intelligent. A couple of examples here. One is the leaf weaver ant. In areas of rainforest where the grounds tend to be very saturated with waters, ants, instead of building the underground tunnels, will weave together leaves into a nest. But the mystery here is, how do these ants know what to do? They all seem to know exactly what to do at any point in time. Ants have been described as operating as though they're part of a single mind. But everyone has a job, everyone knows what to do, and they all seem to know exactly when to do it. Some ants come along and grab 2 leaves and hold them together, while other ants come up with their glue guns. They actually go and get their larvae, which secrete a silken strand. They bring their larvae up, and they use their larvae to weave these leaves together to make a nest. Everyone has a job. Everyone knows exactly what to do at any given point in time. And they build these incredibly complex structures, but where's the boss? Where's the foreman? Who is instructing these ants as to what to do? Again, these ants have been described as operating as though they're part of a single mind. They all seem to be connected somehow or another, and yet the communication has not yet been deciphered. It's one of the big mysteries in the animal kingdom today is communication. We know they're communicating. We see a lot of evidence of that. A lot of signaling, there's hormonal secretions, there's a lot of touching involved, even in ants. They use their pedipalps to touch one another. A lot of communication going on, but it's one of the big mysteries. Leaf weaver ants. Another example of some incredible insect behavior is that animals that are involved with horticulture. They're actually involved in horticulture. Now, these leaf cutter ants, the ones you see in this picture, cut big chunks of leaves out of trees and then haul them off to their underground nest. And when this was first observed, it was assumed that these leaf cutter ants were eating the leaves. And understandably, you would assume that. They're cutting big chunks of leaves, they're hauling them off to their nest, and you would assume that when they got to their nest, they were keeping them there in a storehouse for the winter, or were eating these leaves. But what it was later realized, once they investigated underground, they realized that these ants weren't eating the leaves at all. They are in fact chewing these leaves into a mulch and feeding this mulch to their underground garden of fungus. Actually growing a garden of fungus underground. They cultivate their fungus, they prune their fungus, they harvest their fungus and stack it up to store it for later use. Incredible. Ants harvesting leaves, taking it down and using that as a nutrient base to feed to its fungus. See there, their stack of harvested fungal balls that they're saving for later use. Incredible. Ants also have pets. Insects. Animals keep other animals as pets in a fashion. Anyone know who that little that little guy is right there? Anyone else watch cartoons? Am I the only one that watch cartoons? This is from the Disney cartoon Bug's Life. And it may seem like I'm being facetious here, but you'll understand the connection. This little cartoon creature here his name was Afy on the Disney movie called A Bug's Life. It was the pet of the queen on A Bug's Life. Its name was Afy because it is an aphid, and ants actually keep aphids in an act that can be described as nothing more than animal husbandry. They actually keep aphids. Aphids are herbivores, well, the little insects, and you can see here some ants out with their little herd of aphids. They actually herd these aphids. They take them out to pasture. They let them walk around and eat. The aphids actually secrete a sugary substance called honeydew that the ants then eat. But interestingly, during the winter, the ants even take these aphids underground with them and care for them so that when the spring comes, they can take them out to pasture again, walk them around. And I've actually seen this several times. If you're ever walking around and you see ants up in a bush, if you see ants crawling across a branch, stop and take a look and see if you can see what those ants are doing. Now, aphids are really small, they're really hard to spot, and because they're often green or plant shades, they can be hard to spot. But if you look carefully, you're likely to see the ants that are walking up and down in that branch actually protecting or there with their herd of aphids. Very cool stuff. Again, communication is one of these big unknowns in the animal kingdom. And we know very little about animal communication. We know they're communicating. The sounds that they make, the posturing that they do, the visual cues that they give one another. There's a lot of apparent communication going on, but we have the only form of communication that we've been able to decipher up until now is a communication that's going on within honeybees. Honeybees do what's called a waggle dance. They do a little figure 8 dance you can see in this video right here. What it is scout bees, after they find a food source, will come back to the hive, and then they do this little dance for the hive. When this was first observed, it was thought that this was a mating dance, because there's a lot of animals that do mating dances, birds in particular, field hens and birds of paradise. You might have seen some of these mating ritual dances that some birds do. And it was thought that that was probably what this was. But it was later realized that these were scout bees that were coming back and then doing this little dance for the hive. And eventually they deciphered the visual cue. What they're doing is they're directing the hive to the source of the food that they have found. So they do this little dance. It's a little figure 8 dance. And the direction of the waggle, once they come back around to the figure 8 cue, the direction of their little waggle shows the hive the direction to the food. The length of the waggle gives them an indication of distance, and the intensity of the vibration is actually a cue as to the quality of the food source. It's incredible. But this is the only form of communication in animals we've been able to decipher. Tells us just how little about animals we actually understand. Because I guarantee you all of these animals are communicating, and probably communicating on a similarly sophisticated manner as these. But one thing about animals that's probably fascinated us more than anything else is flight. Humans have always seen animals flying, whether it's the birds or your insects or your bats. One of the things that has fascinated us probably more than anything else has been flight. Because traveling has always been a very laborious thing. Whether you're walking or on horseback, for humans, traveling has always been very laborious. And when people would see a bird cresting a mountain ridge that people know would take them 2 weeks to reach, and yet that bird has managed to get there in just like a half hour, we've always marveled and envied their ability to travel such great distances through air. Flight has always been one of the things that's captivated us probably more than anything else. And it has been a big mystery. At least some aspects of it has been a big mystery. Insect flight in particular has been a mystery. A lot of research has now been done to explain how insects fly. And what we now know, using high-speed photography, slow motion, by slowing down high-speed photography, examining the wing movements on a very detailed level, what we now know is that insect flight in general is accomplished because at the leading edge of insect wings, they're creating little mini vortexes, little mini tornadoes. But just to give you an idea of what's happening here, in general, insects beat their wings incredibly fast. We're talking like close to 200 beats per second. 200 beats per second. Insect wings beat incredibly fast. And although they deciphered insect flight to some extent, bees in particular remained one of the insects that was still a mystery. Back in the 1930s, it was calculated by a famous entomologist that bees should not be able to fly. Their wings beat even faster than much smaller insects. Honeybee wings beat close to 230 beats per second, about the same rate as a fruit fly, even though a fruit fly is only 1/80th of its size. Incredibly fast. And so it had been calculated by an early entomologist that honeybees should not even be able to fly. But some researchers at Caltech eventually looked into it using high-speed digital photography and creating models of bee wings, slowing down the photography and then modeling their wings after what they were seeing in the photography. They eventually learned that what they were doing was using a short, choppy wing stroke and a rapid wing rotation as the wing would invert periodically to accomplish flight. Now, only an engineer may understand how a wing inverting periodically solved the mystery of bee flight. At this point, it's still a mystery to me. But the researchers at Caltech described it as animals exploiting some of the most exotic flight mechanisms that are available to insects. Humans have always studied animals, especially animals that fly. All the way back to the early 1400s, Leonardo da Vinci himself did an extensive study of birds. Over a 15-year period of time, from 1490 to 1505, Leonardo da Vinci studied birds and bird flight in particular. He stated, "A bird is an instrument operating through mechanical laws, which instrument it is in the capacity of man to be able to make with all its motions." He believed that he could design a machine that could fly like a bird, and he actually set out and designed several. This is one of Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines. He called it the Great Orthoptera. Shown, the platform of it shown here, the design of the wings actually shown here. The device was actually too heavy, given the materials available at the time, wood and canvas, and it was meant to be operated by a person laying down on this platform and moving the wings with the legs. The device was actually too heavy, and humans don't have the strength necessary to get the thing to fly. But recently, engineers took Leonardo da Vinci's designs and applied some modern materials to it and a motor, and was able to get Leonardo da Vinci's great flying bird to actually get off the ground and fly. Incredible. But this practice, the practice of studying nature and using that to design technologies or improve technologies, has become common practice. It is what we call biomimicry, or in England, Australia, they call it biomimetics, or you may also recognize the term bionics. These are all synonyms. Biomimicry is the practice of studying things in nature and using those design features to create or improve technologies. A number of important things have been invented or improved upon by studying nature. Velcro, for example, was actually invented after studying stickers or burrs and the way that these burrs would stick to animal hair. After looking at them under magnification, it was realized that each of these spines on a spur actually has a little hook on it. And it's these hooks that grab onto hair. Thus was the basis for the invention of Velcro. Termite mounds were also explored and used to design buildings. It was realized that even in very, very hot climates, the termite mounds would remain fairly cool inside. And by studying these termite mounds and how the termites were able to control the internal environment, they used this as a basis to design buildings. The Eastgate Center, for example, in Zimbabwe, was designed specifically after studying termite mounds. Others, shark skin was studied and has been used to design swimwear. Most of your professional swimmers today actually use swimwear that is based on the studies of shark skin. Gecko feet was studied. Geckos are able to crawl up walls, but not only crawl up walls, they can actually crawl across the inside of a ceiling. And this is possible because they have little microscopic pads on their feet that have microscopic, super microscopic hairs that make up these pads, and a surface area of these hairs provides greater electrostatic forces that allow them to stick to surfaces. And they've used this design to help them develop adhesives, so tapes and other kinds of surfaces that need to be adhered. Instead of using glues, which can be toxic, or the production of glues that can produce toxic byproducts, these microscopic hairs are now being used to adhere things to other surfaces. They've studied humpback whale fins and used these to design turbine blades, realizing that there was something unusual about the humpback fins and the notches that they saw in them, providing them greater friction and traction through water. They designed turbine blades after studying humpback fins. Morphing airplane wings after studying the way that bird wings morph in flight. And of course, robotics has often been based on the study of the way animals move, not just insects, but also terrestrial mammals as well. This is what we call biomimicry. Now, I found a definition of biomimicry on the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory website. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory is one of these huge, city-sized national laboratories in the United States, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They have a talking glossary of genetics, of terms, science terms, and I found this definition of biomimicry, and I thought his definition was very telling. Listen to this definition.
Biomimicry is the process of understanding the designs and materials we find in biology and adapting them for human use. So over the millions and millions of years of evolution, there's tremendous wisdom and efficiency in biological systems.
Notice what he's saying here. There are designs in materials in biology and tremendous wisdom and efficiency that we see in nature. Scientists recognize that there's design there. They're actively looking for design, studying this design, and using it to improve our own technologies. They realize there's a design. Moreover, they realize there's tremendous wisdom there. But the problem is that they don't give credit for the source of that wisdom. And this has always been the case. People have always recognized that there was something very marvelous about the creation. And because of that marvelous nature of the creation, there's always been a great temptation to worship the creation and not give credit to who that creation was due to. Paul warns of this in Romans 1. Paul says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. But listen to the warning. Romans 1:21. He says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. And in one way, that's what scientists are doing today. They take great awe at the world around us. They admire the world that's around us. And yet, they don't give credit to the source of all of this great beauty, all of these tremendous designs. They recognize there's wisdom, but they don't recognize that there's a mind behind the wisdom, or they just don't acknowledge that there's a mind behind the wisdom that's responsible for the world around us. They're dedicated to naturalism. They're dedicated to explaining how this world came to be through purely natural processes. That's why they call it natural science. That's why our museums of science are now called natural history museums. That's why the world that's out there is called nature. But that's not nature. That's the creation. We have to keep that in mind. What's out there is not natural. That's a result of a supernatural act of our Almighty God. Another amazing thing that animals do is navigate. Navigate. Animals are able to navigate. And we would love to be able to get our technology and devices to navigate the way animals can. Recently, it's been a mystery as to how animals were able to navigate, how they're able to change direction, move around objects, get from one point to another. But some researchers recently did some work on bees at the all-weather bee flight facility at the Australian National University. Researchers at the all-weather bee flight facility studied bee flight. And what they found out was that bees are using a complex system called optic flow. They used wind tunnels that they were able to project videos. They projected videos upon the walls of these wind tunnels and were able to monitor bee flight going through a wind tunnel as they projected images on the wall. And what they realized that what the bee was doing was using the speed at which an object moved past it to gauge how far they were from the object. So an object that moves past very slow is obviously very far away. An object that's moving very close, very quickly past your field of view is much closer to you. So, and it seems fairly obvious that they would gauge things this way, but this is a complex form of motion detection called optic flow. And the basis for this complex for this ability to navigate is their compound eye. Many insects have compound eyes, but there's many different kinds of compound eyes. But this is the basis for the bee's precision, ability to precisely gauge distance to objects, because as the object moves past from one facet to a next, they're able to precisely track its rate of movement. And by precisely tracking its rate of movement, they can judge precisely its distance. So it's a complex system, simple system, it would seem, but one that we are not able to accurately create ourselves. We have a lot of devices that we would really love to, if they could navigate themselves, if they could actually make adjustments based on the proximity, how close or far away they are from other objects. If they can navigate themselves, that would be great. And it would seem like we could devise such a thing. But we have lots of unmanned aircraft out there, for example. These drones that we have out there. We would love it if this drone could navigate itself, but instead we have to send it telemetry data. We have to precisely program it with the course that we want it to follow. And if something happens or changes mid-flight, if a weather balloon gets in front of it or a flock of birds, it just bluey is going to plow right into them. They don't have the ability to navigate themselves. Or even our probes that we send off to Mars. We send off these probes to Mars, and we have to again send these things, these technologies, instructions on where and how to move. The Mars Pathfinder mission, for example, we sent this probe to Mars, and it's only able to travel 52 meters in 30 days because it takes 11 minutes for our instructions that we send to reach Mars. So we send our instruction to Mars, tell it to turn left 30 degrees. It then sends information back telling us that it has turned left 30 degrees. And then once we get that data, then we send data back to it. Okay, move forward 10 feet, 11 minutes to get there. It moves forward 10 feet, sends data back. Because of the amount of time it takes to send and receive information, they only are able to move this thing 52 meters in 30 days. If it just had something as simple as optic flow, the ability to gauge for itself the distance to objects, it would be able to navigate itself. But this is God's creation and how much better it is than our own. Animals are also able to see on levels that is remarkable and that we wish we could mimic. It was realized that lobsters are able to see in waters that are almost completely black. They're able to see in waters so dark and so murky, scientists were astonished that they were actually able to see in these kind of waters. And so they analyzed their eyes, and they realized that lobsters have a very unusual kind of compound eye. You see their compound eye here, and notice that their compound eye, rather than having hexagonal facets, actually has square facets. And they realized when looking at the inside of the eye closely that each facet actually has a reflective surface on it. And that these reflective surfaces are angled differently so that all of the incoming light that hits every single facet hits a reflective surface that redirects that light to the exact same focal point on the retina. So all of that incoming light is focused to one point on the retina, enabling the lobster to take advantage of minimal light, virtually no light. And so scientists have examined this technology and are trying to use it to develop some of our own technologies. They're thinking they could use it maybe to develop an array that could detect low levels of X-rays. Maybe mounting one of these detectors on the space shuttle and enabling them to detect low levels of radiation coming in from space. The Department of Homeland Security developed $1 million to develop this device called the LEXID, which stands for the Lobster Eye X-ray Inspection Device, which is modeled specifically after studying the lobster eye. Look at its eye and the square facets found on the LEXID. The device sends out low-level radiation, which then bounces back off of objects and is collected. That low-level radiation is then collected on the lobster eye, giving them a view of what might be inside of boxes and containers and these kind of things. Department of Homeland Security invested $1 million in it specifically for this purpose, to potentially develop a device that would allow them to inspect incoming cargo. But they're also envisioning perhaps uses for it in everything from archaeology to even construction, finding underground wires, or a new tomb maybe out there in the Valley of the Kings, these kind of things. Incredible. We've figured out that there are animals that are able to see that we previously didn't know could see. Researchers realized that even one type of starfish, the brittle star, can actually see, though it has no eyes. And what they realized was that the brittle star's entire skeleton essentially is serving as an optical array. The lead researcher, listening to how she describes the design that she sees in the brittle star skeleton, she says, their study shows how great materials can be formed by nature, far beyond current technologies. In general, arrays of microlenses are something that technology tried a couple of years ago. No one knew something like that already existed in nature. It's amazing what nature can produce. Nature can produce things far beyond our own technology, and yet it apparently formed through purely natural processes. Migration. Animals are able to migrate vast distances, which requires not only ability to navigate, but also an ability to orient oneself. So you have to know when to change direction. You have to be able to navigate around objects, but you also have to know where you are in relation to where you're going. And this requires having some kind of compass, some kind of ability to know where you need to go in comparison to where you currently are. And there are a lot of animals that migrate vast distances. For example, this little bristle-thighed curlew migrates 5,000 miles each year from Alaska to tropical Pacific islands, all the way across the Pacific Ocean. This bird right here, the short-tailed shearwater, migrates 8,000 miles every year from Australia to Alaska. Now, there are a lot of birds that migrate great distances. I chose these two in particular because these birds migrate unguided. A lot of birds migrate in great flocks with the parents and the fledglings all migrating together. These two birds migrate unguided. The parents leave weeks before. And as soon as the fledglings are able to fly, they launch themselves into the air and migrate that distance unguided. 5,000 miles, 8,000 miles unguided. Somehow that information is programmed into them. And what is perhaps most remarkable about this is if you consider that these migratory routes must be learned. This is learned behavior. If our understanding of Earth's history is true, remember that after the flood, all of the animals that are on Earth today were released from Noah's Ark somewhere around Turkey, probably northeastern Turkey, and migrated to their current location based on seasonal changes, weather patterns, the need to migrate towards feeding grounds or to roosting grounds where there are few predators. These migratory routes have been learned. Migratory route that was learned over potentially several generations has somehow become encoded so that these animals are now born knowing to travel these routes and will travel them to the exact same point every year, the exact same beach. Some birds have been shown to come back to the exact same roosting spot in the exact same tree every single year. But they're born knowing to migrate these routes. And this has to be, if our understanding of Earth's history is correct, new information. These are learned migratory routes that are now somehow encoded as innate information. This is now instinctive information that has somehow been programmed into them. Insects migrate great distances too. The monarch butterfly, for example, migrates close to 3,000 miles. Monarchs all over North America travel all the way down to Mesoamerica and form these enormous breeding colonies. You can see a number of them perched there. Literally, monarch butterflies in the thousands travel all the way across from all over North America all the way down to Mexico and form these enormous breeding colonies. What is perhaps the most mysterious part about this? Again, the monarch butterflies that make this migration have never been there before. The entire monarch migratory path from Mexico back into North America takes 3 to 4 generations to accomplish. They migrate back up into North America and lay eggs in milkweed. Several generations of monarchs will live eating milkweeds, undergoing metamorphosis, hatching into butterflies. The cycle repeats through 2 or 3 generations, and then on that one critical generation, the generation where that's going to migrate down to Mexico, instead of only living 3 to 4 weeks, which is a more typical life cycle, that one generation lives like 9 months. They call it the Methuselah generation. The normal monarch life cycle is very brief, only several weeks. It undergoes several successive generations, and then that one last generation that's going to make the migration lasts for several months. But no monarch that makes the migration down to Mexico has ever been there. It was their grandparents or great-grandparents that made the migration before them. Watch that. Now, migration like this has been a mystery for some time. It's been long recognized that there are a number of animals that migrate greater or lesser distances, and indications there have been many indications of what they're using to navigate. Some animals have been shown to use stars. They've literally done experiments in planetariums and shown that some are using star mats to actually navigate. Others are using the moon to navigate. Others have been shown to use sunlight, but they're actually not using the sun directly. Instead, they're able to detect the direction that the sunlight is coming from, the polarization of sunlight. They can actually migrate based on sunlight even when the sun itself is not physically visible. But recently, the homing pigeon has revealed another way of migrating that, at least for birds, was unknown up until this point. The homing pigeon, you might recognize it by another name, the carrier pigeon. The homing pigeons can fly up to like 500 miles per day, and they have been used to carry mail all the way back to the ancient time of the ancient Egyptians. Homing pigeons were used in both world wars, and in fact, there were 250,000 pigeons used by UK forces in World War II. 32 were awarded the Medal of Valor. Literally, 32 pigeons were awarded the Medal of Valor by the UK forces during World War II. But recently, researchers uncovered a remarkable ability possessed by the homing pigeon, and that is that these homing pigeons have little mini compasses in their beaks. Little mini compasses at their beaks. Gerda Fleischner at the University of Frankfurt found that they have little bitty particles called of magnemite or magnetite in their beaks that serve as a three-dimensional compass. She describes it. They have iron-containing particles of magnemite and magnetite in the dendrites of their sensory nerve cells that are arranged in a complex three-dimensional pattern with different spatial orientation designed to analyze the three components of the magnetic field vector separately, thus acting as a three-axis magnetometer. And although these particles seem like they would be some great technology to employ, and through biomimicry we have studied some of this, but at this point the ability to duplicate these particles is beyond our own technology. In the Springer, Gerda Fleischner again, research into how they work has caught the interest of nanotechnologists concerning their potential application for things like accurate drug targeting or even as data storage devices. The main problem, she says, however, lies in their synthetic production. According to Gerda and her colleagues, even though birds have been producing these particles for millions of years, the main problem for scientists who want to find benefits for their use will be the technological production of these particles. We would love to be able to use them. The problem is we can't produce them yet. We don't have the technology. And interestingly, though, we know that animals are using vast numbers of different cues to navigate. Magnets, or sensing the Earth's magnetic field, had been previously uncovered in both bees, sea turtles, and even in bacteria. We know all of these sense magnetic fields and must have particles similar to these somewhere that they're using to sense these. Even Stephen Jay Gould remarked at the sophisticated design behind these particles. Look at this quote from Stephen Jay Gould, probably one of the most famous evolutionists of our days. He described them as striking, good examples of design. It's an organism that builds an exquisite machine within its body. The machine is a magnet, the organism a lowly bacteria. Striking good example of design, an exquisite machine. They recognize their design. They recognize that they're exquisitely designed machines, but don't give credit to the source of those great designs. Of course, God reminds us. Job actually is speaking here when he says, "Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread his wings towards the south?" God instructed Jeremiah, "Even the stork in the sky knows her appointed season, and the dove and the swift and the thrush observe the time of their migration." God has given them this knowledge instinctively. They have this knowledge instinctively. But my people do not know the requirements of the Lord, saying this sarcastically. He has also given us that information instinctively. We do have a built-in sense of right and wrong. Just as the swift and the dove and the thrush know how to migrate instinctively, they know when to leave and exactly where to go. We also have a built-in sense of right and wrong. We know the requirements of the Lord. Even those that do not know him have that instinctive, that built-in sense of right and wrong. One other fascinating thing. I want to show you one more cool thing about animals, and that's color mechanisms in animals. One of the amazing things about animals is their beautiful colors that just fascinates us. And animals have various ways of producing color. Some have pigments. Of course, there are various pigments. Melanin is one of the main pigments used in animals to produce all the various shades of browns to blacks, melanin. But This butterfly right here, although it does have melanin, you see, this is the same butterfly on the picture below and the picture above. This is the blue morpho. Morpho is the genus name of this specific butterfly. Melanin is used to produce the brown shades on the underside of its leaf, but the blue on the upper side of the leaf is not produced by pigment. Instead, that blue is produced through iridescence. Iridescence is the quality of a material that causes it to reflect light back in different colors depending on the angle that light is reflected back or the angle that we view it at. So bubbles, for example, like the one you see here, are producing iridescent color. The different shades of blues and purples are not produced by pigments, but by the direction that the light is reflected back. But blue morphos are able to produce a consistently brilliant blue. Even pilots have reported seeing blues coming from rainforest canopies when these butterflies are in high concentrations. It's a remarkable quality of blue that is produced by the blue morpho butterfly. But it's, again, not produced by a pigment. The key lies in the design of its scales. All butterfly wings have scales. The name that Lepidoptera, the order in which butterflies and moths are both in, the taxonomic order, the name Lepidoptera actually means scaled wings. Their wings have scales. But their scales have these very precisely designed biophotonic structures. You can see a look at its scales there, another look at it there. But let me show you what these look like through a scanning electron microscope. These are the scales of a typical butterfly through a scanning electron microscope. 50 power, I'll come in on a little further. This is 200x. A little further, 1000x. That's a single butterfly scale. And let me show you one even a little closer, 5000x. Now this is a typical butterfly scale, okay, not a blue morpho. What is different about the blue morpho, you see how these bridges are, you have these cross bridges connecting these struts together on this scale? Well, what the difference between in the blue morpho and a typical butterfly scale is that this bridge is not connecting those two struts together. And when they took a cross section of this scale and looked at it closely, they realized that each of those bridges actually looks like a little mini Christmas tree. Instead of them being connected together, there was a branching structure all the way down to the base. And those branches on those little Christmas tree structures that you see right there have reflective surfaces. And so this blue is produced because these reflective surfaces on those branches are reflecting light back at very precise angles. And it's so precisely reflected back that the wavelengths of light actually amplify one another. Whereas if the wavelengths were even slightly off, they could potentially even cancel each other out. But by reflecting it back at a very precise wavelength, the light just becomes even more amplified. It's a brilliant, brilliant blue that's produced by the blue morpho butterfly. And actually, technologists have jumped on this too. Paints themselves can be toxic. The productions of paints can produce toxic byproducts. But if you can produce a substance, a textile, that instead of having pigments, just reflects light back at specific angles to produce those colors, you can eliminate a lot of those potential toxins. And one company called Morphotex has done just that. They're producing textiles in a variety of shades using these reflective iridescent properties of substances instead of pigments. Another company called Qualcomm has produced a display device called Mirasol. And look at their logo, little butterfly there in the logo. This specific display device is based entirely on studies of the iridescent structures within the blue morpho butterfly scale. What the display is based on and the way that they produce these various colors is that they're able to carefully control the distance of a reflective plate. Each pixel on it is actually reflective, has a reflective surface, and by varying the depth or the distance of this reflective surface, they can reflect light back at different angles, producing the various colors. Red, greens, and blues are able to be produced by just carefully controlling the distance, the thickness of this reflective plate. One other example of a remarkable color capability in animals is the color changing that some animals are able to accomplish. This is a cuttlefish, same animal on the left side as you see on the right side. Cuttlefish are one of your cephalopods. Octopus and squid are both cephalopods. This is an octopus. If you can even spot him there. But if you look closely, you can see his eyeball right there, and there's his little blowhole right there. Cephalopods, like your octopus, are not only able to change the color of their skin, but the texture of their skin as well, giving them a capability of camouflaging themselves that is just remarkable. Just boom, just turns into a seaweed, just like that. Now, we would love to be able to make things like that, and military has actually explored creating some of these, a technology similar to this. They call it active camouflage. There are a lot of animals that are camouflaged. They look like leaves. You know, you got bugs that look like leaves and, you know, stick bugs and all these kind of things. Or you look at all the various patterns of coat colors in mammals, you know, whether it's striped or spotted. These are all carefully designed to actually help them camouflage, either into the foliage or to blur together when they're in herd form. But this is a different kind of camouflage. This active camouflage, they're able to blend into their surroundings. And we would love to be able to make something like this, but nothing like that currently exists. Only in prototype forms have we been able to produce anything. This cloak that you see here this picture is from 2012, but the technology itself was developed back in 2003. It's called a retroreflective projection technology system, developed by a researcher at the University of Tokyo to try to make a cloaking, suit there of sorts. But what they're actually doing is just, they've set up a video camera to take a video of the background and are just projecting that onto the cloak. So not even close to what God has made. We would love to be able to make something like that, what the little cuttlefish has. But the cuttlefish even above the octopus and squid have even better capability as far as this cloaking is concerned. They actually have multiple mechanisms that allow them to change the color of their skin. They actually have 4 different separate mechanisms that allow them to change the color of their skin. The one being shown here in this video is a chromatophore. They actually have cells or groups of cells that have a little saccule that contains pigments, and muscles are attached to this saccule, and when these muscles contract, they can spread out the pigments or bring the pigments back close together to make their skin look red or black, or when they bring all the pigment back together, they can get those colors to disappear. So this video is specifically just showing the chromatophore, but they actually have 4 different techniques. They also have an iridophore, one that actually produces iridescent color, similar to the one that we saw in the blue morpho. In most cuttlefish, the iridescent color is fixed, although it can change somewhat by hormonal changes. They also have a leucophore, which are similar kind of plates, similar structures to the iridophore, except that they reflect back ambient light. So whatever light is coming in, they reflect back that same light, enabling them to blend into their surroundings. But they have one other, and that's a photophore. They actually have bioluminescent structures similar to the structures that were possessed by the ninja lantern shark that I showed you in the beginning. Bioluminescence is the ability to produce light. There are a lot of animals that can produce light. Think of your fireflies, but a lot of animals down in the deep, dark ocean also produce light. Some of it seems to be communication based, but the cuttlefish are able to produce bioluminescence, and they're able to do something very remarkable through the production of this light. So, and this is remarkable, okay? This just blows me away every time I see this. See, this little cuttlefish is trying to sneak up on a crab, and at first it's trying to blend into its surroundings, It's going to change the texture and color of its skin to try to blend in with the coral reef there, the reef that's surrounding it. And look how it even holds up its tentacles to try to blend in like it's a piece of weed there or something. But the crab's not fooled. He knows that coral reefs don't swim along, don't move like that. Crab's not fooled. So look what it does. It'll give you another look at it here in just a second. Crab's not fooled by the camouflage, so it pulls out a dazzling display that is designed to mesmerize its prey. Give you one more look at that. Isn't it just bizarre? It mesmerizes its prey. Gets it to pause briefly and just go, whoa, what is that? This is a flying saucer or something, and then it comes in and grabs it. Is that bizarre? It reminds me of the original Jungle Book animated movie. Remember? There's a snake in there that hypnotizes the boy. What was the snake's name? Khan? That a snake that would have mesmerizing eyes like that to hypnotize the boy? I mean, that's what it reminds me of. With all this fascination, again, I want to come back to and remind you that, remember, God spent 2 days making the animals. 2 days. So it's no wonder that we see so much design, so many interesting design features amongst these animals. The only aspect of God's creation that he spent 2 days making. Spent 2 days making the animals. Spent 1 day making the entire rest of the cosmos. The sun, the moon, all the stars were created on day 4. That would be all the stars, all of those galaxies, all those planets, nebula, all of the astronomical bodies created on 1 day, 2 days making the animals. So I wonder that they're so amazing and so marvelous to us. But you also have to consider why. There's a purpose for everything. Why did God make the animals? Consider for a second. He spent 2 days making animals. And think about all the varieties that we see. All the invertebrates, all the vertebrates. We know more about the vertebrates, but in reality of the animals, the vertebrates only make up about 5% or less of all animals. Most of them are invertebrates. Think about all the insects, a number of species, as I described previously. Why did he make those? Remember, they weren't made for food. We eat them today, and I know because I'm a big steak and potatoes kind of guy, But if you read Genesis, God did not create the animals in the beginning to be food. This is specifically stated. I give you every green, a seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth and the birds of the air and the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has a breath of life in it, I give you every green plant for food. According to this verse, not only was plant the food for us, but for all the animals as well. That seems to be stated. Why did he create the animals then in the beginning? Why did he create them? Think about it. We use them today for commodities, We've historically used their skins for clothing and these kind of things, but that wouldn't have been the case in the beginning either. Remember, God created after the fall of man. God then used an animal and created clothing for Adam and Eve. But again, that wasn't why they were created in the beginning. You could argue that they're created to be a testimony. Remember? Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, are clearly seen in what has been made, so that men are without an excuse. He created this world with an amazing with design all around us. So a person would have to be blind not to see. And they are truly blinded by their worldview, that they can't see all the amazing design that they see around them. A clear testimony. In the book of Job, again, ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds of the air and they will tell you, or speak to the earth and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Ask the animals and they will teach you. There's clear testimony of that God has created the world that's all around us. But I would offer up one more reason why he created the animals. I think he created them because he knew we would love them so much. And we do love our animals. I mean, people that have pets know just how painful it can be when one of your pets that you've had for many years it dies. And when you love someone, You want to give them something that you know they will love. I think one of the main reasons he made the animals and made them with all these varieties and special abilities and these things that we marvel at continuously is because he loves us so much. We love the animals, but God loves us on a level that we cannot fully understand. God has a capacity of love. We were created in the image of God, which means we're a dim reflection of what he is. He's given us a capacity to love, but his love for us is much, much greater than anything we can conceive. And I think he created the animals because he loves us that much and wanted to create a world that we would continuously enjoy. But from it, we have learned so much. We've learned to appreciate God all the more, but we've learned so much that we've been able to make our life easier in the process. I would argue that we would not be flying today if it wasn't for our studies of birds and God's creation. That despite the technology that we've developed at this point, that we probably would not still be flying today. But if it wasn't for a study of the technologies that God has made and has put out there for us to marvel at, to study, to enjoy, that was for this reason. So when you're at home, loving on your pet, loving on your dog, or loving on your cat, remember, when you're at the zoo, when you're outside and you see God's creation, remember the source from where these things come from and why God made them. He made them because he loves us and wanted to create a world for us that we would continuously enjoy. One last word for you. The animals.